My name is Darrin Hagen, and I moved to Edmonton in 1982 and became a drag performer. Once I survived that, having gotten a few of the crowns that were available in Edmonton at the time, I moved into theater and started using drag as a performance device and as a theme for my writing and creative output. So that has sort of veered into queer history over the years. So that's kind of the shortest version of my bio that I can give you.
Wonderful.
Do you
So
want to know how many crowns I had?
I would like to know how many crowns you had.
I was Ms. Flashback. That was 1984. I stepped up. I was the big brother Ms. Flashback, the George Orwell Ms. Flashback. And then I became, at the same time, I was actually Lulu's Imperial Crown Princess, Imperial Crown Princess 9. And then Lulu gave me Entertainer of the Year a couple of years later. And then a few years after that, I won Entertainer of the Decade.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. There's only been 4 Entertainers of the Decade so far. I'm number 2.
Well, I'm surprised you don't have that tattooed on you somewhere.
How do you know I don't?
Oh.
Oh my God.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Edmonton? Why did you move here?
I had family here, and I kind of knew Edmonton a little bit. I knew the downtown because I had come here often as a child to visit my aunt and cousins. I had more family here than any other place except for Peace River country. And so literally in Rocky Mountain House, the difference between a drive to Calgary and a drive to Edmonton is 1 mile. It's right, Red Deer is right in the middle and Rocky Mountain House is just off to the side, right? So it was literally not about proximity, it was about where could I get a good footing. And it was a city where I already kind of knew my way around. And it was a city where I could live with a relative until I got on my feet. So it was as simple as that. Edmonton was not supposed to be my home forever. I had big plans and then they all happened here. It's completely of the moment. It was of the moment. I was there in the moment when it became a word that was powerful politically. It was forward-looking. It was just controversial enough to piss people off, which was nice. It indicated a sense of fighting back that the word gay didn't at the time for me. And it's not that I rejected the word gay or homosexual for the word queer. For me, all 3 of them went along together, right? But as I get older, I realize that the word gay talks more about what kind of sex you're having. The word queer talks more about how you sit politically. And so for me, the word queer, it's none of anybody's business who I'm having sex with, right? So it's the word queer to me is less about sex and more about how I see the world. Which the word gay also did the same thing for me for a long time, but it had the sexual connotations in along with it as well. I was doing it was the Pride group at the university many years ago, like 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe. And this is my first indication that the language was changing as fast as it was. I had posters, I had chat, Neon put someone in drag while I talked about being a drag queen, and I dropped the F-bomb several times. By that, I'm not talking the F word, I'm talking the word, it's a pejorative against gay men. And it's a word that I've always used purposefully, intentionally, as a way of taking back that power. And also, I tend to speak to classes that are 99% heterosexual for the first 20 years of my career. And so to be able to use that word in front of those people, man, it pissed off the straight boys. Like it really freaked them out. And I loved that. So I love the power that came with that, right? And so anyway, I did that class. And then the next year they called me back to book me again. And they said, however, some of the students were really concerned with your use of these words. And they listed 2 words that I had used. And I went, but I'm gay and I'm a drag queen. I'm allowed to use those words. And they went, yeah, some of these students come from small towns and only had an experience with them in a negative sense. I'm like, that's who I fucking am. That was my experience. And so, and my counter offer was, well, let's have a chat about the words then. Let's have a discussion about the words and let's talk about why I use the words. And basically I was told, no, I couldn't use those words. And I went, well, but then that there's a whole list of words that I'm not allowed to use. So what happens when you don't allow people to use those words is you actually pull a whole bunch of cultural iconic moments out of queer history. So for instance, if I can I say the words? Am I allowed to use the words now?
Please do.
If I say the word faggot, if I can't say the word faggot, then I can't talk about the book Faggots by Larry Kramer, which is an important seminal piece of queer literature. If I can't say the word dykes, then I can't talk about my favorite lesbian radicals, which are dykes on bikes. And there's this whole list of things, like you know as well as I do, that means I can't say any of the words that I often use for shock value, for intent, for impact, for fun, as a way of a punchline. Like there's a million ways of using those words and diffusing some of the negative power that's involved with them. So I was at a political fundraiser breakfast, and my friend Peter Field was there, who's an artist who's about 6 or 7 years older than me. So in my terms, that's a whole different gay generation. That's the pre-AIDS gay generation. And I'm the AIDS generation, right? Just in terms of the timing of when we became adults. And so I was like, and then they wouldn't let me say the word this, and they wouldn't let me say the word this, and they wouldn't let me say, and he was like, and he listened very patiently. And then he went, you know what word I really hate? And I went, what? He went, queer. And this is an artist who had written a piece for Loud and Queer, the queer festival that I had, hosted and curated for decades. And I was like, how can you hate the word queer? He went, because my generation is the generation that put the word gay in play to get rid of the word homosexual. And then suddenly we were erased by the word queer, because queer was a political thing in response to the AIDS epidemic. And so I realized in that moment that the language is always evolving, that every generation has its own language. Now, the problem is that if you go back and try to erase the language that came before, you erase those experiences. You erase them. And erasing our past is going to lead us down a very dark and torturous and dangerous path. Because if we don't know what came before, and if we don't know about the experiences, and if we don't take back some of that language, if we don't stop censoring each other, how are we supposed to fucking listen to each other, right? Homer Simpson said it to John Waters. And another thing, how come you use the word queer? That used to be our word for you, right? So for me, it's dangerous to say, we can't say this and you can't say that, and this word doesn't mean that anymore. Now, I totally understand how the older generation views the word queer. And there are a lot of my contemporaries that hated the fact that I used the F word, but it was used at me my entire life for 18 years. So to say that I can't use it means the fag bashers have all the power of that word. The word comes with power. Let me tell you another story. I was in Key West doing a show of mine. I'm not bragging. I'm not city name dropping. I was in Key West directing my brilliant American debut of my play, and I was staying with this rich doctor that lived in Key West in one of those brilliant 3-story Key West houses, and I lived in the very attic, the 3rd story in its own suite. It was fantastic, and he insisted that we sit and have gin at 5 o'clock every night because that was his daily ritual. And I'm not adverse to a good nice gin. And so he and I would sit there, and it was interesting because he was retired. So he was at least 65, maybe 70. He had lived a very different queer life than I had. In fact, he had a wife and kids, a whole family. And it wasn't until after they had all moved away and, he'd gotten divorced that he met his lover and became part of a same-sex relationship. And we got into a giant argument one day about the word marriage, because he didn't believe that same-sex marriage should be called marriage. Now, this is a white doctor who lived a hetero life of privilege in all of society's sanctions. He got to be married, but his partner, he didn't call that a marriage. And he didn't think that when 2 men got together, he said, call it a civil union, call it a partnership, call it whatever you want. You shouldn't call it marriage. I went, well, how come? He went, well, it's just not right. And I went, the fact that you're trying to keep the word marriage from me shows that the word marriage has power. So you're not actually trying to keep the word marriage from me. You're trying to keep the power of the word from me. So when someone tells me I can't say the word fag, they're trying to keep the power of that word out of my hands. So in other words, give the gun to the enemy, but don't let me have one. I can't tell you on how many levels that offends me. When you use the word marriage as an example, it's suddenly a much different thing, and everybody understands that suddenly, because the word marriage does have power. And that's exactly why they didn't want us to call it marriage equality. They wanted us to call it anything but marriage, because otherwise it wasn't the church's specific domain anymore. It was suddenly something that all humans had access to. That's what they don't want. I was in Banff many years ago, and I was watching TV, and there was a documentary about about interracial marriage in the States in the 1950s. And it showed members of Congress standing up and giving their arguments against interracial marriage. Guess what? word for word, they were the exact same arguments that they use against marriage equality for queer people. It's dangerous to the foundation of the family. God created them separately for a reason. They need to be kept separate. Like, it was the same arguments, but it was applied to something completely different. And even though I'm married, it wasn't a burning issue for me. It was my husband's idea, and I went along with it because he wanted it, and it made the transfer of whatever we owned simpler if one of us passed away, for one thing. It came after his parents both passed away, so I think that was a big thing for him. And even though I fought for the right for queer people to marry, it was never my smart ass answer was always, the last thing I need is another overpriced dress I'm only going to wear once. But in reality, it was not, as much as I am glad that we're married, it wasn't top of my list in terms of a priority. And partially it's for the exact same reasons that you're saying. I don't need the church or society's sanction, or like, I don't need any of that stuff to prove that I'm in it for the long haul. But I will defend to the death the right for gay people to get married if that's what they want, for queer people to get married, right? The fact that there's a chunk of society that wants us to not have access to it is exactly the reason why we have to have access to it. So actually, my very first time in drag would have been, I was 10 years old, and it was Halloween. I didn't perform, but I did perform. The whole thing was a performance. It was a weird day. I remember that because I was so much fun being in drag. My mom sort of found a curly wig and some cat-eye glasses and a fur hat and a fur coat. She called me Babe, because she said I looked like a comedy prostitute. In reality, there was something very Carol Burnett. I've seen pictures of that day. There was something very Carol Burnett about how I looked that day. And the cat-eye glasses totally played into who I became as a drag queen later, because I loved cat-eye glasses. And Carol Burnett is a huge comedy influence on me anyway, and a performing influence. So I'm totally cool with that. I do remember that at the end of the day, when I took it all off and went to the dinner table, that my lips were still stained with red lipstick, and that made my dad really unhappy. I do remember that. My next time in real drag was probably, it would have been grade 10 drama class, when I did drag and sang No More Tears, Enough is Enough with my friend Kim Bolton in our falsettos as part of this big variety show. We played Donna Summer and Barbara Streisand. And then that was probably the last of it until I actually moved to Edmonton. And then when I moved to Edmonton, January 14th, 1983, not that anyone's counting, that's when Gloria was born. I had no problem with the fact that I was a boy who liked to be a girl. And that's how I became a drag queen, I would imagine, is once I had access to that experience, I realized that I enjoyed it. And that I was good at it. It actually unleashed something in me that was a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing, right? And when I first started doing drag, it's so interesting because I always choose the hardest way to do something. So the easy thing, if you want to be a drag queen in a gay bar, the easy thing is get a pretty dress, get a pretty wig, do a Barbara Streisand number, right? You just stand there and do this with your arms, and just like you're at home. And I never did that. I always made it more difficult than it had to be. So we were Lulu and I were part of the punk sort of era, the new wave kind of era. So nothing was literal. Like if you did Cry Me a River, you had to put a spin on it. You couldn't just stand there and lip sync it. So I actually did a lot of comedy drag and anti-glamour. I did anti-glamour big time. Cat-eye glasses, waitress uniforms. Lulu would be the glamorous one, and I would be her comedy sidekick. That's kind of how we got going. So for instance, we did do Cry Me a River by Barbara Streisand, but we did closed caption for the thinking impaired. So I did made up sign language beside her while Lulu sang the strong straight. I dressed like a clown, basically, lampshade on my head, whatever I could find in the background, punk, right? Dog leashes, like the whole bit. And I would do made up sign language, Cry Me a River, right? Which is great until you get to the word, until you get to the line, told me love was too plebeian, and we couldn't find a way to sort of act out the word plebeian, so we had a sign that we said plebeian and put it back down. I came up to Edmonton to become a composer, and then I saw my first drag show. Oh, I didn't tell you about that. That's actually on video on YouTube, the first drag show I ever saw. If you know where to look, you might even be able to find me in the audience at 18 years old. But if you find the link to that video, I think there's actually more than one video in that link. And that is my first year in Edmonton, and I was in the audience at every one of those shows. I saw every one of those shows live. And they're full of people who I would later become dear friends with and later become performers with, and then many of whom I had to watch pass away within a few years. So I can't watch it too much. There's just they're so fucking loaded, right?
How long was it from watching your first show on Halloween to getting up on stage?
January 14th, the next January.
The next
So
January.
from October 30th to January 14th. That's how long it took.
Few months.
And I was actually offered the part in a drag show because I was one of the speaker queens. Do you know what that is?
Mm.
There used to be these giant speakers. They were go-go platforms basically around the stage. And you know, if it was your song, you'd get up there and push off the straight chick that was taking up your space and do a number, even if you weren't in drag. Show off your moves, whatever. And It's Raining Men was a huge hit. It was brand new the first time around. I loved it because it's such a powerful song, and I would do that song, and the speaker was mine for those 5 minutes. And I remember the Reigning Empress came and had heard that I was interested in doing drag and came and watched me do that number and asked me to do my very first drag show. So Gloria's last show was the Edmonton Queen.
Right.
Every show since then has been someone else. Absolutely. Right. Although Dottie in Tornado Magnet was Gloria before she got pretty, the cat eye glasses comedy Gloria, right? So that like, and in reality, even when I do Hosanna, like I'm kind of just doing me, right? You know, some of the stuff that I've done later with Trevor, the stuff where we're writing plays and actually acting, that's more, I'm putting on a costume. It happens to be a female costume. I'm playing a character, absolutely. But like, I don't have a lot of vocal dexterity that I can change my voice and make it a falsetto or any of that shit. Like I just don't. I'm not that good of an actor. That is me performing at the Toronto Ball. Veronica Blake gave me a command performance. We hit it off huge in Edmonton when she came to Edmonton because we both had long, beautiful, real red hair. And so when I went to the Toronto Ball, I decided I would do something that Toronto had never seen before. And rather than doing, you know, your standard drag number, I did Gloria by Patti Smith, the punk poet. And so my thing whenever I did that number was just before I go on stage, I go dunk my head in the sink. So that when I come on stage, the hair is just drenched, like you're in mid-concert and you've been working it for hours and this is the big finish. And also when you do your hair flips, there's this giant arc of water that goes flying off to the side. It's so dramatic, especially under a strobe light. So that's actually me at the Toronto Ball. And I actually have a really, what year would that be? It was the year that Gretchen was Ms. Flashback. So we're probably talking 89-ish, maybe. Yeah, just before I got my hair cut, probably. Now, the great thing about that is you can't quite tell, but I'm wearing a really heavy crucifix that's between my bosom. I can't tell if it shows up in the picture. Okay, so that crucifix is solid metal. And as I was doing this 3 times during the number, it went bonk and hit me in the forehead, which is no big deal. I've hurt myself on stage before. It's okay. I always like give her when I'm on stage, right? Go 110%. I had to learn how to change that when I became an actor. But the next morning when I got up and took my makeup off, because I slept in my makeup that night, of course, I took my makeup off and there was actually an upside down cross bruised on my forehead. And I had to go to the victory brunch that way. Well, I put makeup over top of it, but everyone could see it. So that's, and the thing I was gonna say, see over, you can't quite see it, but over my shoulder is a cape, a black cape. That cape is a genuine nurse's cape from the 1950s. I think I might have shown it to you when we were at the garage. It's black velvet with a hot pink lining, and it was given to me by my dear friend, Janie Marie Lee, Bianca Bang Bang, who passed away quite a few years ago. And he was actually the very first person I had seen do that number. He was a drag queen that didn't do drag very much. He was kind of done by the time I showed up on the scene, but we were very good friends later on, and he gave me that cape. So I still have that cape. My mermaid tail. This is the only piece of drag I still own from the old days, other than that cape. Very few pieces have made it all that way. So yeah, that's actually a classic shot. This was taken by, believe it or not, a Grant McEwen student who was doing a photo essay project. And so I ended up doing the photo shoot for free for her. And then she ended up giving me some of the pictures. And that's the one that I kind of remember the best. The mermaid tail has a million stories. I don't know how many of them you want. It was made for me by a young man who is one of my customers at Flashback, who I'm sad to say, I can't remember his name, but he was a charming man. And we used to flirt across the bar and he always tipped me great. And we were talking about costumes and drag, and he was a big fan. And at one point he said, what would you like, what dress would you love if you could have any dress you wanted? I went, oh my God, I've always wanted the mermaid tail for Bette Midler in the wheelchair, right? She does the mermaid tail shtick. And he literally showed up a week later and gave me a mermaid tail. And it's all I did to it was add the pearls. The rest of it has never changed, which is kind of awesome. Now, the mermaid tail was kind of impossible to use. It comes with problems because you can't walk in it. So now, the first time we used it publicly was actually at the Fringe, I believe, and it was in the Fringe parade. So I actually sat on a 57 Pontiac and was driven down White Avenue. And that's when I believe we got some really good media coverage from that outfit that year. And also that's when my grandma saw me in drag on TV for the first time, because she wouldn't have recognized me except that I said something to the TV camera as we floated past it, and she recognized my voice. And then, so it was in the Fringe Parade in 1987. It was actually in the show that year for no good reason, just because I had it. I think I did a Barbara Streisand number in a mermaid tail for no apparent reason in that show. I just realized I did a person could develop a cold. It makes no sense, I know. Then years later, that mermaid tail actually ended up becoming very iconic. We used it as in the photo shoot for the Edmonton Queen poster. That's with the shot that you see of me in the reflecting pool in front of City Hall. That's actually a good story too, because we wanted to get pictures of me getting arrested or harassed by security guards. That's why we did. We didn't ask permission. Drag queen advice, don't. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Just show up and do your drag scene. So we put me into a dinghy, gave me an accordion. It was really hard because, you know, the dinghy floats wherever it wants to, right? And so I kept having to paddle so I could face the camera. We'd take 3 pictures and then I'd start to turn the wrong way and I'd have to paddle again. It was a total nightmare. And in the meantime, no one's saying, hey, you got to get out of the pool. Hey, you didn't get permission. Like we wanted pictures of me. And finally, after about an hour of this, a security guard from City Hall came towards us. And I'm like, okay, here it comes. And we start taking pictures. The security guard comes up and says, excuse me, ma'am. And I went, yeah, how's it going, sir? He went, I just wanted to let you know that the fountains are about to come on and I didn't want you to get your accordion wet. So yeah, you try and get arrested in this town, and yeah, this doesn't work sometimes. Oh, and then I ended up using it for the Street Performers Festival in 1995, I think was the first year I did the Street Fest. And that's the year that I was taunted by children for 2.5 hours as they screamed, "You are a man, you are a man." And it was literally one of the worst, lowest experiences of my showbiz life, being taunted by 3, 4, 5-year-olds for 2 hours, because the line between boy and girl is so distinct that they don't want it screwed around with. And I made the mistake of saying something out loud to one of the kids, thinking I would be funny, and they realized I was a boy, and they started to taunt me. And it was literally a moment that lives in infamy. In fact, it made it into the book, and it made it into my play with bells on. There's a whole thing about the mermaid tail. So yeah, this mermaid tail has given me not just a whole bunch of really good photos, but like a million stories. Oh, I wanted to tell you about something else I did in the mermaid tail. This is actually great because I was actually a centerpiece at a seafood buffet in that mermaid tail. I'm not even kidding. And it was great because as people would go by, I'm sitting here literally leaning up against a treasure chest with pearls flowing out of it, surrounded by clams on the half shell, smoking a cigarette. And as they would grab their seafood, I go, have you tried the fish? Oh my God. So I feel awful that I can't remember the name of the man who actually sewed me that mermaid tail, because he's a lovely man. And I hope he knows how much joy that outfit has brought me. Oh my God, I just got emotional saying that. So many memories. Up here is the orange dress that's actually in the exhibit. And that's the only time, I've only worn that dress twice. That was one of the times for that photo shoot. The other time I actually got flown to do a Valentine's sort of erotic cabaret in Fort St. John or Fort Smith. Oh God, we had this talk last time. Where was it? Oh, I forgot to look it up. One of the northern BC towns. I'll find out. And I actually hosted an event in that dress. The stories are not really about the dresses as much as they are about the experience you have in the dresses, right? This dress, I wish it was mine. I wish. The beautiful glass beaded one. It's solid glass. It weighs a ton. It belonged to a queen called Tootsenelda Wolfenpickel. That's her
Say
drag
that
name.
one again?
Tootsenelda Wolfenpickel.
Of course.
Yeah, of course. And his name was Horst. He had some fabulous stuff. He also made beautiful gowns, but this is not one he made. This is one that he bought. And actually, I have footage of me wearing this dress, this gown, on the Ampias. I was the first drag queen to ever present to do a shtick at the Ampias. And what we ended up doing was Wes Borg and I did something about how not to accept an Ampia award. So we got to do all the things that you're not supposed to do on live TV, on live TV. And the best part, it's actually a good story. This is a good political moment, because we did our shtick, and it was all, you know, don't insult the other losers, don't use your Ampia to drink out of, stuff like that, because the Ampia, you can totally put cocktails in it if you wanted to. And the last thing our shtick was going to be that we were going to do a big kiss. And in rehearsal, they said, you can't end it that way. And we were really mad because I felt like I was being censored, but we ended up coming up with something more scandalous that we did on live television when they couldn't stop us. So rather than kissing, we went, fine, we won't kiss. We went backstage and went, what can we do that's worse? And we came up, so it was, don't make fun of the other losers. Don't use your drink as your Ampia as a cocktail glass. There was a whole bunch of other things, you know. The last thing we decided to do was, and Wes would say, don't do this, and then I would do it. That was the shtick. And Wes was, do you know Wes Borg at all? Short little red-headed comedy guy. His idea of a tuxedo was a tuxedo t-shirt, right? That he was wearing next to me looking like that, right? And so he said, and whatever you do, this is the last thing. He said, whatever you do, don't make any political statements during your acceptance speech. And I said, I just want to say what an honor it is to win an award like this in a province where I still don't have human rights, but it's perfectly acceptable to have a drag queen parading around for everyone's amusement. And the crowd went insane. It was so fucking awesome. We stole the show. Everybody across Alberta got to see it. It was awesome. I hope they play it at my funeral, because it was one of those fucking moments that just went so beautifully. And it's because we were told no. And after the show was over, because I was looking so damn glamorous that night, I actually went to the Bistro Praha dressed like that and thinking, oh, I'll freak out the Bistro Praha and, you know, show up in drag. And I walked in, and Milan, who knows me very well because it's a restaurant I've been going to for years, just went, the usual, Darren, and sat me down. I think the reason they had me on there was to make some sort of political statement. And then when we got sexual about it, they chickened out. And so them chickening out allowed us to make an even more political statement, which was even more appropriate, because that ending was 10 times funnier and more outlandish than what we had come up with in the first place, which I fucking love them. I love them for censoring me in that moment. And that's often what happens, is when you try to squish down the toothpaste, it just squirts out another fucking hole, right? The next shot, I love it, but we don't actually, I mean, of course, my third picture with an accordion in this series, so you can see what my most often used accessory is. I do happen to have about 8 of them, so, you know, one for every day of the week, practically. I don't have much to say about these outfits, except that they exist. The show is a gas. I was a little kid at my grandma's house, and I was playing on her chord organ. And her sister, my grandma's name was Hazel. I'm going to throw some old world names at you here. Hazel, Mabel, Ruby, and Mary were the 4 sisters. So grandma's sisters were visiting, and Mabel, great Aunt Mabel, was a music teacher. And it wasn't that music really ran in our family, although music was always a part of celebrations and stuff. Like Uncle Gordy used to be a great whistler. Someone played the guitar, no big deal. But we didn't have any musical instruments growing up. And then, but I was always drawn to a piano, and grandma had a chord organ, which is like an accordion laid out so that your left hand is over here and your right hand is over here. It's buttons and keys, but they're all in front of you. And in a matter of 10 minutes, I figured out how to play on top of Old Smoky. And so when Mom and Aunt Mabel came back, grandma said, play the song that you were playing. And I played it, and great Aunt Mabel looked at Mom, and then she looked at me and she said, how did you know which notes to play? And I said, well, they just sounded right. And she looked at Mom and said, get that kid music lessons. So when I was, I think 8 or 9, we bought a 12 bass accordion, which is the small one for kids. And the music teacher said that should last him for a couple of years. 2 months later, she said, we got to get him a bigger accordion. So that we got me a 48 bass, which is kind of an intermediate accordion. It's not the huge one, because I was still a little kid, right? We couldn't put the big ones. So she said, this should last him till he's like, 14 or 15. At the end of that year, we had to go up to 120 bass because I was moving past my teacher so fast. And eventually I passed my teacher, and that's when she said, you should get him a piano. Because the accordions are a small investment. They're like, $75 at a next to new sale or at a flea market, right? But a piano was a huge deal. Now, the shot of me in front of the throne, that's a dress I love. And it's not really mine, but it's a gown designed by a drag queen in Calgary named Design a Gown. That's her drag name. So, I mean, it's just gorgeous. I have nothing to say except that it just makes me feel fabulous. But look at that fucking throne. This is the final moments of the Edmonton Queen, and you can see the stage and all the photos and of all the queens that have passed away. And yeah,
gorgeous.
That's Trash is the only one. See those 4 photos that are lit up?
Yeah.
Trash on the left is the only one that's still alive.
Okay.
And then the photos all over the floor are actual photos of the flashback photo collection, turned into 8x10 black and whites and just scattered all over the floor. And so after this is what's cool, is after the show ended, people would come and just spend time looking at the photos. Right? They would walk around as if it was a shrine. And I love that. And there was even nights when there would be drag queens that would come in full costume, and they would actually have their picture taken on that throne. It started off as a eulogy. It became a bunch of short stories. It became a short one-person play. It became a short book. Then it became a longer play. Then it became a bigger book. And then it became another play again. And the hardest thing in the world, I think, was to have to rewrite that last chapter to deal with the death of Lulu on stage in front of everybody. There's something interesting that happened when I was rehearsing this play in 2001 that I wanted to share with you, just as a performer and as a writer. I remember coming out on stage. We were rehearsing in a theater, and I came out on stage, and there's nobody else in there, just me and the director and the stage manager. And I started to do the show, and I was about 5 minutes in, and Ron went, "Stop." I went, "What? What? I was feeling it." And he went, "In your head, they're already dead, aren't they?" And I went, "Well, yeah." He went, "Go off. You haven't met them yet. You have to come in and discover them all and fall in love with them." And so that's the hardest part about doing the Edmonton Queen, is you have to bring them to life and bring them on stage with you. And then you have to say goodbye to every one of them over and over again. So that's why it's really hard to do now as a performer. Plus, I'm just too old to do that much walking around in high heels for 90 minutes on stage. That would kill me. So in the 90s, I was asked to write a eulogy for the funeral of a drag queen that had passed away. Millie, Empress One, had passed away. And so I wrote a eulogy for her that sort of celebrated who she was when she was alive. And I got really good feedback. And I had written something back in 1987 when we did our first Fringe drag show, but it wasn't really my thing yet. But I wrote this eulogy, and it ended up getting published in Times Point 10, and I got some really good feedback about it. And I thought, I have other drag queen stories I could write. And other drag queens, it was the 90s, the drag queens were starting to pass away from AIDS. And it was a very traumatic time. And I remember there was one summer when my husband and I went to just so many funerals. And so I started to write stories for each queen that passed away out of my life. And I started to collect them. And before you know it, I was asked to read here and there at different sort of, writer events. And I was also hosting Loud and Queer at the time. And so I used the Loud and Queer stage to sort of present one of my stories that I'd written. And I remember Christy Harcourt coming up to me and saying, "Hey, can I ask you a favor? Keep writing." And I just like that beautiful piece of advice and encouragement. So I kept writing. And then the Fringe in 1996, they did something called the Anniversary Venue, where they offered a free spot to a bunch of Fringe favorites. And Guys in Disguise by that time had been the top selling show at the Fringe for a few years, right? It just was doing old style cabaret drag shows, variety shows. And so I think that they thought that I was going to bring them that. And I had a meeting with them and went, well, I have actually this idea to present a bunch of monologues about my drag queen friends that have passed away. And I said the title would be The Edmonton Queen, not a riverboat story, because the boat was starting to become famous. And they said yes. And so I did a 45-minute one-man show. It's the first time I've ever done a one-man acting role. It's the first time I've ever written anything significant. It was the first time I'd memorized 45 minutes worth of text. It was a lot of firsts for me that year. And I was lucky I was very lucky in two ways. The timing was kind of perfect. And there was a publisher in the audience one night, and Candace Jane Dorsey. And Candace came up to me afterwards and said, do you have more stories like that? And I said, yeah, tons. And she said, then keep writing. Let's talk about a book. She already knew that queer history was becoming a thing. Me, having no academic experience, I had no idea about that. So, so I started writing stories, and eventually I had a book deal. And then later on, as the book came out, I also got a Sterling Award for Outstanding New Fringe Play that year. So that literally was the beginning of my fringe career, or of my writing career. So 1996 was the first version of the show. The glass beaded dress that I showed you was the photo shoot for the second version I did for the show in 2001. By the way, I didn't wear that dress on stage. It's impossible to perform in that dress other than the ampias. I wore something silver. It's designed by Stanley Carroll, which I don't have any pictures of right now. And then the third time I did the show, oh, so a little bit about the project. So I wrote the 45-minute version of the play, and then I expanded it into a book. And then a few years later, I wanted to take the show on the road, and I went and read the original play and went, oh, it's just not the book. There's all this new stuff now. And so I had to rewrite the play. So in 2001, that was a whole new version of the Edmonton Queen. It was no longer a 45-minute show. It was now a 90-minute show. And it was much more written. And I was a better performer then. And then we actually took it on the road. We took it to Winnipeg Fringe. We took it to Regina. I think, did I do it in Calgary? No, I never did do it in Calgary, just the three cities. But then we brought it back. So then I got an offer to do a 10th anniversary edition of the book. And so it was like, oh, so now I have to rewrite the book again. So as I was working on the 10th anniversary edition of the book, my drag mother, Lulu, phoned me and said that she had brain cancer. And we had no idea if she was going to survive it or not. And so I'm working on a book about our lives together as she was dying. And I had to actually, I remember in February, the book was due. No, January, the book was due of 2007. Yeah, January 2007, I was supposed to deliver the book. I called them up and I went, Lulu's dying. I could rush this so that she can see it before she dies, knowing that that might not work, and knowing that then we won't have, it'll be obsolete because it won't be up to date. I said, or we can push the publication date back a few months and see what happens. And they went, okay, but we can't wait too long. I went, I understand. And then Lulu passed away in February. So I had to finish the book and deliver it after she died. And so there I kind of went, there, I'm done with the Edmonton Queen. But, you know, pieces of art tend to have their own ideas about when they are finished. A few years later, after the book, the 10th anniversary edition of the book came out, which I actually got to send Lulu the new material, and I actually got to include a letter from Lulu as the last statement in the book. Because what I did, just so you know, there had been people who took real issue with some of the things I'd written in the book. And so I actually took this opportunity of the reprinting of the 10th anniversary edition to call up some of those queens and say, write whatever you want, I'll put it in the book. What were your impressions? What would you like to set the record straight on? And so there's a chapter called 10 Years Later, the Queens Have Their Say. And Lulu's letter to me is the last email I ever got from her, and it's the last thing in the book. And so then a few months later, I was approached by the Fringe again, and they went, hey, we're taking old Fringe hits and putting them on stage. I went, no, because every other time I did the show, Lulu was alive. And I got to be that person at the end. And they convinced me to do it. So we did one last version. So the version that you see with all the photos scattered everywhere is the final version that we did of the show in 2009. Oh, damn you.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. It catches me off guard. Like I never know what word is going to trigger it. I always know it's going to happen some way, but it always catches me off guard because I never start there.
Okay. But did you experience gender dysphoria at any time? Like
I don't know how, I'm not sure what that means, except that when I was a little kid, I thought I was a girl.
Mm-hmm.
I put a towel on my head so I could pretend I had long hair. I only associated with girls. And in grade 4, I was told I wasn't allowed to anymore. But it wasn't about body for me, but it was about the experience. Experientially, I did not trust boys. I trusted girls. Experientially, I did not relate to boys. I related to girls.
Mm-hmm.
Every other way other than my physical body, I was a girl. but
Mhm.
I had a boy's body and I was okay with that. It's everybody else that wasn't okay with it, right?
Right.
I had no problem with the fact that I was a boy who liked to be a girl.
Mhm.
That's how I became a drag queen, I would imagine. Is once I had access to that experience, I realized that I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
And that I was good at it. It actually unleashed something in me that was a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing, right? That we're trying to be women. I think that's still something that's out there and confuses everybody. I think for me, it was all about being. See, here's the hard thing. It's still, after 40 years of doing it, it's still hard for me to put the experience into words. And this is why I resist everyone who thinks that they've got it all figured out, because they don't, because nobody does. Because if gender was all figured out, we wouldn't be having any of these discussions and there wouldn't be the need to cross-dress, right? All I know is for me, I think I explained this to someone the other day because we actually did a chat about Hosanna. They got local writers to pick a play that was important to them, and we had talked about it with a Zoom call. With it was like a book club, but they all had to read. I made them all read Hosanna, which you should look up, by the way, if you don't know anything about it, because it was 1973 when that show made its first appearance. So a drag queen on stage in 1973 in Canadian theater, long before it was savvy or politically astute to do so. So real inspiration and a pivotal moment in my evolution as a drag queen, because I saw the show in 1983 as I started doing drag, and then I saw it 10 years later after I'd been through almost everything. You know what the plot is? It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Her lover teams up with one of the other drag queens and they play a prank on her. They say, oh, it's Halloween. We're having a special party. It's dress up as your favorite celebrity. Everybody knows that Hosanna's going to dress up as Elizabeth Taylor and Cleopatra. And so she walks into the room and her friend La Duchesse goes, don't go in there, don't go in there. She goes, I've worked on this outfit for months. I'm going in there. And she walks in and the entire hall is full of drag queens dressed as Cleopatra. And so the play starts as she comes home from that humiliation. So anyway, the second time I saw that, I had Life cereal dumped on me in front of a full audience of people as I stepped down as Ms. Flashback. See, I've got so many stories that we haven't even touched on yet. And so I had been through the cruelty of the drag scene the second time I saw the show. And then the third time I actually saw the show, I got to be in the show. I got to be Hosanna. And so those were all about 10 years apart. It was really kind of amazing how they marked very different spaces in my career. There was a piece of me that I had to suppress for 18 years by necessity to stay alive, to survive. I had to suppress it. And what happened was when I moved to Edmonton and I started to do drag, that side came back. The side that had been suppressed for my own safety and for my own survival came back, and it came back in such a way that it pushed itself right to the front of my existence. And so for the next 10 years, Darren was in the service of Gloria. Gloria was in charge. I got referred to as Gloria even when I wasn't dressed as Gloria. It was her decade, right? That was her decade. And over the years, what happened is the need for Gloria became less and less, because ultimately Darren found a place to be okay with being an effeminate man. And ultimately those two people came back together again. And so that's, for me, drag is not about, do I want to be a woman? It's about, I need to be able to express the full range of who I am from masculine to feminine. And that can change. And that can be different depending on what my emotional needs are is at any given moment, or how I'm reacting to different situations. And so for me, drag is the fullest expression of who I am. Because Gloria was not really that different than Darren. She was Darren without being censored. Gloria was Darren with no off button, right? Gloria was Darren with no fear. And what happened is the expression of Gloria brought Darren back into the fold so that he could actually have a life. So the man I am is because of the woman I dressed as. And I always say, even if I never wear another dress as long as I live, I will always be a queen. It's not something I walk away from and go, oh, that's something I used to do. No, I am a drag queen. I'm just not a practicing drag queen anymore. And trust me, if I was thinner and younger and not as poor, I would be, right? I would still be doing it all the time because it was so exciting to do. It was so exciting to be that person. The whole idea of drag has changed so much in terms of what the original source material was. The makeup looks today just kind of blow my mind, and I kind of don't recognize what they are. In fact, I'll never forget when we did Drag Queen Bingo in Vancouver, at the Vancouver Fringe. In what year would that be? I still had long hair, so it's pre-2003. So that's not that long ago, you know, only 1,000 years. I remember getting in drag, and I had to, the queens that I had hired to do the show with us as the Vanna girls couldn't show up for some reason. And so I had to call in Mandy and her friend Carlotta at the last minute, and they showed up, and they were in big Vancouver drag, and they walked in, and I was there with my own hair, flat ironed, my own makeup, you know. And I remember one of the girl, Carlotta, who I didn't know very well, went, "Wow, your look, it's very trans." I went, "Is it? Because this is my drag." This is why I get so upset when people tell me that I don't know what they're talking about. It's like, you think you know what drag is, but you don't, because drag has so many different, like that and me in the cat-eye glasses sticking my tongue out at the camera. Those are both drag.
Yeah.
Right? Those are both drag, and neither of them bear any resemblance at all to the drag you're seeing now. If you took, you know, all the Judith Butler teachings and all the gender dysphoria teachings and all the gender fluidity stuff and the drag as a political act and go down to the bar. Now, this might be different now, because people are a bit more savvy and the information is a bit more readily available now. But if you had gone to the bar in 1982 and asked the nearest drag queen, you know, "Are you deconstructing gender?" They'd go, "Who the fuck are you? What does that even mean?" Because that's not what drove them to do it. Like what I described to you as that personal impulse, that personal moment of expression of something that's real within yourself that becomes a badge of pride as opposed to a badge of shame. That's what drag is. And it has nothing to do with deconstructing gender, even though that's exactly what you're doing. Right? But you don't study about this stuff and then decide you want to become a drag queen. You finally unleash who you are, and that's how you become a drag queen. And then you read about it in after the fact and go, "Oh, is that what I was experiencing? Or is that what the impact of my drag was?" If it was. If you do drag and never do it outside of a gay bar, are you deconstructing gender? Is it a political act?
Huh.
Or is it only a political act when you take it out into the straight world? Which I did many, 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 many times at great danger, by the way.